Everyone thinks of changing the world, but no one thinks of changing himself. Leo Tolstoy. The ego has learned to be very clever in order to survive. It is capable of resorting to any lengths, a ruse of self-deception and camouflage. The world we witness is merely the drama of collective egos acting out on the perceptual stage of form and time. The satisfactions of the ego are more pleasurable and addictive than the preservation of human life, much less dignity. David R. Hawkins. Our modern world is reflection of our collective ego, our false, illusionary self-identity, and this reflection is frightening. What we are doing to each other and to our children is the reality hard to believe and to accept. Although no person wants to suffer, people continually gravitate to the things that cause suffering because of their ignorance. The origin of suffering is attachment to transient things and the ignorance thereof. War and violence are fueled by human greed and envy rooted in deep ignorance. Genocide has never resolved any problems. In fact, it made problems and conflicts much worse. Why alcohol, drugs, prostitution, and pornography, including child pornography, exist in our modern world? Because there are many people who crave for it and buy it. Without demand there would be no supply. We humans are capable of immense love and sensitivity, but we have also been capable of greed, hatred, brutality, rape, murder and war. This duality of what has historically been referred to as good and evil has troubled the human mind since we first became fully conscious, thinking beings. Are humans essentially good, and, if so, what is the cause of our evil, destructive, insensitive and cruel side? Are we evil by design, a corruption? If we were observing beings on another planet behaving like our own species, we would very likely call them monsters. Yet we appear to be blind and numb when it comes to crimes we inflict onto our own species, driven by ignorant ego and false beliefs. By now, with the aid of modern science and technology, we could have easily started not only exploration colonies on the Moon and Mars, but also have eliminated hunger, disease, and poverty on our entire planet. Instead, we spend majority of our wealth and scientific knowledge starting senseless wars which kill millions of defenseless people. Are wars and violence reflection of evilness of a small minority who control and manipulate the rest of the population, or are these reflection of thinking and attitudes of an average human being viewed as a holographic reflection of our collective consciousness? What makes it possible for genocides of millions to be initiated by just one person, e.g. Stalin, Hitler, Pol Pot? Out of fear, our ego, in its blind desire to dominate and survive at any cost, will justify commitment of most horrific acts. Genocide. Genocide is the deliberate extermination of a racial, religious or ethnic group. Chambers Dictionary. Genocide, whether committed in time of peace or in time of war, is a crime under international law. Genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethical, racial or religious group, as such killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, forcible transferring children of the group to another group. The following acts shall be punishable: genocide, conspiracy to commit genocide, direct and public incitement to genocide, attempt to commit genocide, complicity in genocide. From the United Nations Convention on Genocide, 1948. With macabre bureaucratic precision, the Khmer Rouge photographed their victims before torturing and killing them. This picture is all that remains of a mother and child murdered in Tuol Sleng prison sometime between 1975 and 1979. Many countries signed the convention, some of whom have since been party to genocide. Only a few people have been charged with genocide or complicity in it. The word genocide was coined in 1944 to name a particularly shocking and horrific crime of violence which it was then believed could never happen again. That it has been put into practice so many times in 1 century is even more shocking. The human race is the only species that can and does think itself into anger and violence. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. We ought to be able to think our way out of it too. Later I realized that violence didn't achieve anything. One much practiced way of thinking one's way to violence is developing beliefs to back it up. Some of them may head towards the absurd. Violence is the only way to get respect. Violence is the only language they understand. I'm good, you're evil. We're peaceful, they're brutal. I wasn't going to let them beat me. They're all cheats, les scroungers dit. If I took it lying down, I couldn't hold my head up again. And so on. There may have been a time in the early history of the human race, a time when the natural world was the chief threat to survival, when this kind of primitive thinking served a purpose. But it's nothing but a handicap now. Genocide is not a wild beast or a natural disaster. It is mass murder deliberately planned and carried out by individuals, all of whom are responsible whether they made the plan, gave the order or carried out the killings. Whatever its scale, genocide is made up of individual acts, and individual choices to perform them. So human individuals need to make the commitment, as early in life as possible, that they will have no truck with it. To do that, the way genocide becomes possible has to be understood. There follow outline histories of 8 20th century genocides. You may want to research some of them further. There are also pointers towards some of the issues they raise, particularly in respect of their causes. Prejudice, racism, grievance, intolerance, aggression, injustice, oppression, they all start small, and we need to spot and stop them in our own local orbits before they grow and get out of control. This means looking at the often long prehistory of genocide, as well as its symptoms in the present. Understanding these will help to avert future horrors. 8 Genocides of the 20th Century. Source: http www.ppu.org.uk genocide_intro.html. Another example that must not be forgotten: the Nanking Massacre. A Nanjing Massacre, also known as the Rape of Nanking, was a mass murder and war rape that occurred during the 6-week period following the Japanese capture of the city of Nanjing, the former capital of the Republic of China, on December 13, 1937 during the Second Sino-Japanese War. During this period, hundreds of thousands of Chinese civilians and disarmed soldiers were murdered by soldiers of the Imperial Japanese Army. Widespread rape and looting also occurred. Historians and witnesses have estimated that 250,000 to 300,000 people were killed. The International Military Tribunal for the Far East estimated that 20,000 women were raped, including infants and the elderly. Tang Junshin, survivor and witness to one of the Japanese Army's systematic mass killings, testified the seventh and last person in the first row was a pregnant woman. The soldier thought he might as well rape her before killing her, so he pulled her out of the group to a spot about 10 meters away. As he was trying to rape her, the woman resisted fiercely. The soldier abruptly stabbed her in the belly with a bayonet. She gave a final scream as her intestines spilled out. Then the soldier stabbed the fetus, with its umbilical cord clearly visible, and tossed it aside. Source: the Memorial Hall for the Victims of the Nanjing Massacre. Rhetoric in the Face of Tragedy. PDF 310 KB, Celia Yang, 2006. Spending for peace versus spending for war. There is a large gap between what countries are prepared to allocate for military means to provide security and maintain the global and regional power status, on the one hand, and to alleviate poverty and promote economic development, on the other. SIPRI report from 2004. United Nations. While the UN is not perfect and has many internal issues that need addressing, it is revealing that the world can spend so much on their military but contribute so little to the goals of global security, international cooperation and peace. Ad Namid Sense 160 by 600_orange. Indeed, compare the military spending with the entire budget of the United Nations. The UN was created after World War II with leading efforts by the United States and key allies. The UN was set up to be committed to preserving peace through international cooperation and collective security. Yet, the UN's entire budget is just a tiny fraction of the world's military expenditure, approximately 1.8%. The United Nations and all its agencies and funds spend about $30 billion each year, or about $4 for each of the world's inhabitants. This is a very small sum compared to most government budgets, and it is less than 3% of the world's military spending. UN Financial Crisis, Global Policy Forum Access. July 7, 2010. Secretary General introduces $4.89 billion, 20,102,011 budget to Fifth Committee. This budget is equal to the cost of 1 week of Iraq War. Budget info. Source: http www.un.org. Newspress docs 2009 garb 3925.doc.htm. World Peace and Aid Organizations. Here is another example of a large world organization trying to spend money for peace. As you can see, its annual budget is just a microscopic fraction of what the world is spending on wars. The approved program and budget for 20,102,011, with a budget ceiling of US $653 million, which was adopted by the General Conference at its 35th session by consensus. This money is spent on education, natural sciences, social and human sciences, culture, communication and information, general policy and direction, and program execution and administration. This entire budget is less than one day of the Iraq War. US $720 million. http://blog.worldmysteries.com. See Transformation of the Human Race. http://blog.worldmysteries.com. Swarampi's Project Monarch. One of the most diabolical atrocities perpetrated upon a segment of the human race, a form of systematic mind control which has permeated every aspect of society for almost 50 years. This exposition is substantiated by declassified U.S. government documents, individuals formally connected to the U.S. intelligence communities, historical writings, researchers knowledgeable in mind control, publications from mental health practitioners, and interviews taken from survivors unwittingly subjected to a highly complex form of trauma-based mind control known as monarch programming. No violence against children is justifiable. All violence against children is preventable. There should be no more excuses. Child abuse is a problem no one really talks about. Abuse and neglect is the #1 cause of injury to children in the country. More children die of abuse and neglect than of natural causes. Children can be abused in several different ways. Abuse may be physical, mentally, verbally or sexually. Some are physically abused to the point of death. Worldwide, approximately 40 million children are subjected to child abuse each year. WHO 2001 Suicide is the third leading cause of death in adolescents around the world. WHO 2002 One study revealed that about 30% of all severely disabled children relegated to special homes in the Ukraine died before they reached 18 years of age. Human Rights Watch 2001 UNICEF estimates that 2 million children died as a result of armed conflict during a recent 10-year period, and that another 6 million were injured or disabled. Human Rights Watch 2001 In Canada, the US and Mexico, over 6.5 million children annually are exposed to unwanted sexual materials over the internet. Over 1.7 million of these report distress over exposure to these materials. Esther's Wiener 2001 Each year, approximately 1 million more children around the world are introduced into commercial sexual exploitation. Casa Alianza 2001 Sexual abuse statistics vary between countries and reports, but are consistently alarming. One country's research indicates that up to 36% of girls and 29% of boys have suffered child sexual abuse. Another study reveals up to 46% of girls and 20% of boys have experienced sexual coercion. The 57th session of the UN Commission on Human Rights. Source http www.amado.com Community 110475 Articles 18196 On October 11, 2006, the United Nations UN released the first UN Secretary General's study on violence against children, which addresses violence against children within the family, schools, alternative care institutions and detention facilities, places where children work, and communities. The study took years to complete, and was supported by the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, the World Health Organization (WHO), and the Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights (OHCHR). The report includes the following overview: Statistics Section 2. B. pp. 910, with references to specific studies provided for each. Almost 53,000 children died worldwide in 2002 as a result of homicide. Up to 80 to 98% of children suffer physical punishment in their homes, with a third or more experiencing severe physical punishment resulting from the use of implements. 150 million girls and 73 million boys under 18 experienced forced sexual intercourse or other forms of sexual violence during 2002. Between 100 and 140 million girls and women in the world have undergone some form of female genital mutilation cutting. In sub-Saharan Africa, Egypt and the Sudan, 3 million girls and women are subjected to genital mutilation cutting every year. In 2004, 218 million children were involved in child labor, of whom 126 million were in hazardous work. Estimates from 2000 suggest that 1.8 million children were forced into prostitution and pornography, and 1.2 million were victims of trafficking. Our Right to be Protected from Violence Activities for Learning and Taking Action for Children and Young People is an educational booklet for children and young people over the age of 12, which provides information about violence and ideas for actions they can take to prevent violence and respond to it. Here are links to the websites devoted to the study. Also see the World Health Organization's 2002 study, World Report on Violence and Health. The entire report, a 372-page and 2.4 megabyte PDF, is available in English, French, Russian and Spanish. A 54-page 600 kilobyte summary is available in Arabic, English, French, German, and Spanish. Chapter 3, Child Abuse and Neglect by Parents and Other Caregivers, is 30 pages 177 kilobytes and can be downloaded in English, French, or Russian. Chapter 3 reviews and provides references for many academic studies on rates of abuse in a variety of countries, though it is not comprehensive. There is also a 1994 paper by sociologist David Finkelhor, an internationally recognized expert on research on the incidence and prevalence of child sexual abuse, and director of the Crimes Against Children Research Center. The countries covered in the paper are Australia, Austria, Belgium, Canada, Costa Rica, Denmark, Dominican Republic, Finland, France, Germany, Greece, Great Britain, Ireland, Netherlands, New Zealand, Norway, South Africa, Spain, Sweden, Switzerland, and the United States. Please note, because this is a 1994 publication, and this is a growing field of research, additional studies for some of these countries and other countries have been published by now. Here's the citation and abstract. Finkelhor, D. 1994. The International Epidemiology of Child Sexual Abuse. Child Abuse Neglect, 18, 409,417. Abstract. Surveys of child sexual abuse in large non-clinical populations of adults have been conducted in at least 19 countries in addition to the United States and Canada, including 10 national probability samples. All studies have found rates in line with comparable North American research, ranging from 7% to 36% for women and 3% to 29% for men. Most studies found females to be abused at 1.5 to 3 times the rate for males. Few comparisons among countries are possible because of methodological and definitional differences. However, they clearly confirm sexual abuse to be an international problem. Source: Child Abuse Statistics, Research, and Resources by Jim Hopper, Ph.D. UN report uncovers global child abuse by David Usborne in New York, October 12, 2006. A shocking picture of physical abuse and mistreatment of children in countries in every corner of the world, ranging from corporal punishment in schools to forced prostitution, rape and mutilation, was revealed in a survey by the United Nations last night. The report, requested by Secretary General Kofi Annan 4 years ago, says international conventions on human rights for children have flatly failed to guarantee protections for the most vulnerable members of society. While abuse may be at its worst in the developing world, no country is guiltless, it says. Violence can be perpetrated by governments, by criminals, but also by the family, the report notes. It recalls the words of a girl interviewed in an unnamed East Asian country. With these 2 hands my mother holds me, cares for me, this I love. With these 2 hands, my mother hits me, this I hate. The core message, concludes Paulo Sergio Pinheiro, the study's author, is that no violence against children is justifiable, all violence against children is preventable. There should be no more excuses. He recommends urgent action to hold governments accountable for ensuring children are treated as full citizens, not as many human beings, a property of their families. While Mr. Pinheiro was helped by many international organizations as well as by testimony from children in several countries, he says many of the offenses are hidden in the shadows. He nonetheless offers a range of grim statistics, including a finding that 53,000 children were victims of murder in 2002. His report stops short of naming countries with the worst records on protecting children's rights. Louise Arbour, the UN's High Commissioner on Human Rights, said the survey takes the lid off the global scandal. A veil of silence covers violence against children, yet abuses are so pervasive that no country can ignore them, and no society can claim to be immune from them, she said. The British-based charity Save the Children, which with its chapters worldwide, collaborated closely with the compiling of the report, also noted yesterday that more than 1 million children are imprisoned worldwide, of which 90% were found guilty of only minor offenses. Violence in prisons and other, often state-run, institutions, including hospitals and orphanages, many holding children in squalid conditions, is highlighted in the survey. As one child, who had suffered the imprisonment, told researchers, sometimes 1 day in prison felt like a year. But after 10 days you get used to it and you don't cry as much. Some of the violence is perpetrated in the guise of medical treatment, the report says, noting that in some cases children as young as 9 are subjected to electroconvulsive treatment without any anesthesia or relaxants. Also explored is violence, sometimes sexual, within families and at schools, as well as the plight of children caught in trafficking, bonded labor and the child sex industry. every year sees another million children driven into the pornography and prostitution industries, the report says, adding, many are coerced, kidnapped, sold and deceived into these activities, or are victims of trafficking. Citing figures from the World Health Organization, it asserts that 150 million girls and 73 million boys under 18 experienced forced sexual intercourse and other forms of sexual violence involving physical contact in 2002. The murder rate among minors was twice as high in low-income countries than in the developed world, the report found. But sexual abuse in the home is a blight shared by all nations. In 21 countries, most of them industrialized, as many as 36% of women and 29% of men said they had been the victims of sexual abuse during childhood. Most of the abuse occurred within the family circle, the report said. As many as 77 countries sanction violent punishment of children found guilty of crimes great or small, ranging from execution to corporal retribution, including caning, flogging, stoning or even, in some countries, amputation. How children are exploited. According to the World Health Organization, up to 53,000 children are murdered worldwide each year. Between 80 and 93% of children suffer some form of physical punishment in their homes, a third are punished using implements. In 2002, the WHO estimated that 150 million girls and 73 million boys under 18 experienced some form of forced sexual intercourse or violence. 218 million children worldwide are laborers, 126 million of whom work in hazardous environments, 1.8 million are involved in prostitution or pornography, and 1.2 million have been trafficked. Up to 275 million witness domestic abuse annually. 8 million worldwide are in residential care. There are 250,000 child soldiers in the world. According to Amnesty International, 40% of soldiers in the Democratic Republic of Congo are children. 11,000 have still yet to be disarmed. 1 billion children live in countries where it is legal to beat pupils. Save the Children says 1 million children worldwide have been imprisoned. Sources: WHO, UN, AI and Save the Children. Source: greater than, and whoso shall receive one such little child in my name receiveth me. But whoso shall offend one of these little ones which believe in me, it were better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck, and that he were drowned in the depth of the sea. Woe unto the world because of offences, for it must needs be that offences come, but woe to that man by whom the offence cometh. Wherefore if thy hand or thy foot offend thee, cut them off, and cast them from thee. It is better for thee to enter into life whole to maim, rather than having 2 hands or 2 feet to be cast into everlasting fire. And if thine eye offend thee, pluck it out, and cast it from thee. It is better for thee to enter into life with 1 eye, rather than having 2 eyes to be cast into hell fire. Take heed that ye despise not one of these little ones, for I say unto you, that in heaven their angels do always behold the face of my Father which is in heaven. Matthew chapter 18 110 King James Version KJV. Subject: related resources and links. 1. The Id of Women Suffer Domestic Violence, who last updated Thursday, June 20, 2013. About a third of women worldwide have been physically or sexually assaulted by a former or current partner, according to the first major review of violence against women. In a series of papers released on Thursday by the World Health Organization and others, experts estimated nearly 40% of women killed worldwide were slain by an intimate partner, and that being assaulted by a partner was the most common kind of violence experienced by women. Violence against women is a global health problem of epidemic proportions, WHO Director General Dr. Margaret Chan said in a statement. WHO defined physical violence as being slapped, pushed, punched, choked or being attacked with a weapon. Sexual violence was defined as being physically forced to have sex, having sex because you were afraid of what your partner might do, and being compelled to do something sexual that was humiliating or degrading. The report also examined rates of sexual violence against women by someone other than a partner and found about 7% of women worldwide had previously been a victim. In conjunction with the report, WHO issued guidelines for authorities to spot problems earlier and said all health workers should be trained to recognize when women may be at risk and how to respond appropriately. Globally, the WHO review found 30% of women are affected by domestic or sexual violence by a partner. The report was based largely on studies from 1983 to 2010. According to the United Nations, more than 600 million women live in countries where domestic violence is not considered a crime. The rate of domestic violence against women was highest in Africa, the Middle East and Southeast Asia, where 37% of women experienced physical or sexual violence from a partner at some point in their lifetime. The rate was 30% in Latin and South America and 23% in North America. In Europe and Asia, it was 25%. Some experts said screening for domestic violence should be added to all levels of healthcare, such as obstetric clinics. It's unlikely that someone would walk into an ER and disclose they've been assaulted, said Sheila Sprague of McMaster University in Canada, who has researched domestic violence in women at orthopedic clinics. She was not connected to the WHO report. Over time, if women are coming into a fracture clinic or a prenatal clinic, they may tell you they are suffering abuse if you ask, she said. For domestic violence figures, scientists analyzed information from 86 countries focusing on women over the age of 15. They also assessed studies from 56 countries on sexual violence by someone other than a partner, though they had no data from the Middle East. PTI source http://news.india.com News World Unheard of women suffer domestic violence _856449.html Female genital mutilation FGM At least 130 million women in Africa have been circumcised, and 2 million more girls undergo the practice every year in 28 African countries, mostly in the continent's north and central areas. Key facts: female genital mutilation (FGM) includes procedures that intentionally alter or injure female genital organs for non-medical reasons. The procedure has no health benefits for girls and women. Procedures can cause severe bleeding and problems urinating, and later, potential childbirth complications and newborn deaths. An estimated 100 to 140 million girls and women worldwide are currently living with the consequences of FGM. It is mostly carried out on young girls, sometime between infancy and age 15 years. In Africa, an estimated 92 million girls from 10 years of age and above have undergone FGM. FGM is internationally recognized as a violation of the human rights of girls and women. Female genital mutilation (FGM) comprises all procedures that involve partial or total removal of the external female genitalia, or other injury to the female genital organs for non-medical reasons. The practice is mostly carried out by traditional circumcisers, who often play other central roles in communities, such as attending childbirths. Increasingly, however, FGM is being performed by healthcare providers. FGM is recognized internationally as a violation of the human rights of girls and women. It reflects deep-rooted inequality between the sexes, and constitutes an extreme form of discrimination against women. It is nearly always carried out on minors and is a violation of the rights of children. The practice also violates a person's rights to health, security and physical integrity, the right to be free from torture and cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment, and the right to life when the procedure results in death. Source greater than pornography. Pornography is one of the most powerful drugs created by the human ego. Convinced we are separate from each other, we are trying to feel less lonely, be seeking companionship in distorted illusion of love. Addiction to sex, just like drug addiction, is a bottomless cup. We can never fill it up. Our thirst for true love can never be satisfied this way. The statistics are truly staggering. It's big business. The pornography industry has larger revenues than Microsoft, Google, Amazon, eBay, Yahoo, Apple and Netflix combined. 2006 worldwide pornography revenues ballooned to $97.06 billion, according to compiled numbers from respected news and research organizations. Every second $3,075.64 is being spent on pornography. Every second 28,258 internet users are viewing pornography. Every second 372 internet users are typing adult search terms into search engines. Every 39 minutes a new pornographic video is being created in the United States. Worldwide pornography revenues and 20,052,006 U.S. pornography revenue stats. Pornography revenues are not necessarily ranked according to population. China topped the list in 2006 with more than $27 billion in pornography revenues. However, South Korea, only the 26th most populous nation on Earth according to the U.S. Census Bureau, is next in line with more than $25 billion in pornography revenues. The Internet is not the most popular form of pornography in the United States. Video sales and rentals accounted for $3.62 billion in revenue in 2006, while Internet pornography raked in $2.84 billion. Magazines were the least popular. Source http internet filter review.toptonreviews.com Internet pornography statistics.html The time of transformation and destruction. The timeline of human history with very few exceptions shows continuous history of war, genocide, injustice, suffering, and corruption. It seems that humankind has not changed for better in thousands of years. Our modern technology reached fairly advanced stage, however our spiritual growth is still at the level of Sodom and Gomorrah. Is there hope that the evil must be purged by some global catastrophe as it happened in the biblical time of Abraham? Genesis chapter 1819, King James Version KJV 1. And the Lord appeared unto him in the plains of Mamre, and he sat in the tent door in the heat of the day 2. And he lifted up his eyes and looked, and, lo, 3 men stood by him, and when he saw them, he ran to meet them from the tent door, and bowed himself toward the ground. 3. And said, My Lord, if now I have found favor in thy sight, pass not away, I pray thee, from thy servant, for let a little water, I pray you, be fetched, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. 5. And I will fetch a morsel of bread, and comfort ye your hearts after that ye shall pass on, for therefore ye come to your servant. And they said, So do, as thou hast said. 6. And Abraham hastened into the tent unto Sarah, and said, Make ready quickly 3 measures of fine meal, knead it, and make cakes upon the hearth. 7. And Abraham ran unto the herd, and fetched a calf tender and good, and gave it unto a young man, and he hasted to dress it. 8. And he took butter, and milk, and the calf which he had dressed, and set it before them, and he stood by them under the tree, and they did eat. 16. And the men rose up from thence, and looked toward Sodom, and Abraham went with them to bring them on the way. 17. And the Lord said, Shall I hide from Abraham that thing which I do? 18. Seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. 19. For I know him, that he will command his children and his household after him, and they shall keep the way of the Lord, to do justice and judgment, that the Lord may bring upon Abraham that which he hath spoken of him. 20. And the Lord said, Because the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grievous. 21. I will go down now, and see whether they have done altogether according to the cry of it, which is come unto me, and if not, I will know. 22. And the men turned their faces from thence, and went toward Sodom, but Abraham stood yet before the Lord. 23. And Abraham drew near, and said, Wilt thou also destroy the righteous with the wicked? 24. Peradventure there be 50 righteous within the city, wilt thou also destroy and not spare the place for the 50 righteous that are therein? 25. That be far from thee to do after this manner, to slay the righteous with the wicked, and that the righteous should be as the wicked, that be far from thee. Shall not the judge of all the earth do right? 26. And the Lord said, If I find in Sodom 50 righteous within the city, then I will spare all the place for their sakes. 32. And he said, O let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak yet but this once, peradventure 10 shall be found there. And he said, I will not destroy it for 10's sake. 33. And the Lord went his way, as soon as he had left communing with Abraham, and Abraham returned unto his place. 1. And there came 2 angels to Sodom at even, and Lot sat in the gate of Sodom, and Lot seeing them rose up to meet them, and he bowed himself with his face toward the ground. 2. And he said, Behold now, my lord, turn in, I pray you, into your servant's house, and tarry all night, and wash your feet, and ye shall rise up early, and go on your ways. And they said, Nay, but we will abide in the street all night. 3. And he pressed upon them greatly, and they turned in unto him, and entered into his house, and he made them a feast, and did bake unleavened bread, and they did eat. 4. But before they lay down, the men of the city, even the men of Sodom, compassed the house round, both old and young, all the people from every quarter. 5. And they called unto Lot, and said unto him, Where are the men which came in to thee this night? Bring them out unto us, that we may know them. 6. And Lot went out at the door unto them, and shut the door after him. 7. And said, I pray you, brethren, do not so wickedly. 8. Behold now, I have 2 daughters which have not known man. Let me, I pray you, bring them out unto you, and do ye to them as is good in your eyes. Only unto these men do nothing, for therefore came they under the shadow of my roof. 9. And they said, Stand back. And they said again, This one fellow came in to sojourn, and he will needs be a judge. Now will we deal worse with thee, than with them. And they pressed sore upon the man, even Lot, and came near to break the door. 10. But the men put forth their hand, and pulled Lot into the house to them, and shut to the door. 11. And they smote the men that were at the door of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they wearied themselves to find the door. 12 And the men said unto Lot, Hast thou here any besides son-in-law, and thy sons, and thy daughters, and whatsoever thou hast in the city? Bring them out of this place. 13 For we will destroy this place, because the cry of them is waxen great before the face of the Lord, and the Lord hath sent us to destroy it. 14 And Lot went out, and spake unto his sons-in-law, which married his daughters, and said, Up, get you out of this place, for the Lord will destroy this city. But he seemed as one that mocked unto his sons-in-law. 15 And when the morning arose, then the angels hastened Lot, saying, Arise, take thy wife, and thy 2 daughters, which are here, lest thou be consumed in the iniquity of the city. 16 And while he lingered, the men laid hold upon his hand, and upon the hand of his wife, and upon the hand of his 2 daughters, the Lord being merciful unto him, and they brought to him forth, and set him without the city. 17 And it came to pass, when they had brought them forth abroad, that he said, Dwell, escape for thy life, look not behind thee, neither stay thou in all the plain, escape to the mountain, lest thou be consumed. 18 And Lot said unto them, O, not so, my lord. 19 Behold, now, thy servant hath found grace in thy sight, and thou hast magnified thy mercy, which thou hast showed unto me in saving my life, and I cannot escape to the mountain, lest some evil take me, and I die. 20 Behold, now, this city is near to flee unto, and it is a little one. Oh, let me escape thither, is it not a little one, and my soul shall live. 21 And he said unto him, See, I have accepted thee concerning this thing also, that I will not overthrow this city, for the which thou hast spoken. 22 Haste thee, or escape thither, for I cannot do anything till thou be come thither. Therefore the name of the city was called Zoar. 23 The sun was risen upon the earth when Lot entered into Zoar. 24 Then the Lord rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. 25 And he overthrew those cities, and all the plain, and all the inhabitants of the cities, and that which grew upon the ground. 26 But his wife looked back from behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. 27 And Abraham got up early in the morning to the place where he stood before the Lord. 28 And he looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah, and toward all the land of the plain, and beheld, and, lo, the smoke of the country went up as the smoke of a furnace. 29 And it came to pass, when God destroyed the cities of the plain, that God remembered Abraham, and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the cities in the which Lot dwelt. 30 And Lot went up out of Zoar, and dwelt in the mountain, and his 2 daughters with him, for he feared to dwell in Zoar, and he dwelt in a cave, he and his 2 daughters. Related posts. Signs of the last days. What really happened to Sodom and Gomorrah? Buddha's solution. The 4 noble truths. 1. Life means suffering. 2. The origin of suffering is attachment. 3. The cessation of suffering is attainable. 4. The path to the cessation of suffering. 1. Life means suffering. To live means to suffer, because the human nature is not perfect, and neither is the world we live in. During our lifetime, we inevitably have to endure physical suffering such as pain, sickness, injury, tiredness, old age, and eventually death, and we have to endure psychological suffering like sadness, fear, frustration, disappointment, and depression. Although there are different degrees of suffering, and there are also positive experiences in life that we perceive as the opposite of suffering, such as ease, comfort and happiness, life in its totality is imperfect and incomplete, because our world is subject to impermanence. This means we are never able to keep permanently what we strive for, and just as happy moments pass by, we ourselves and our loved ones will pass away one day. 2. The origin of suffering is attachment. The origin of suffering is attachment to transient things and the ignorance thereof. Transient things do not only include the physical objects that surround us, but also ideas, and in a greater sense all objects of our perception. Ignorance is the lack of understanding of how our mind is attached to impermanent things. The reasons for suffering are desire, passion, ardor, pursuit of wealth and prestige, striving for fame and popularity, or in short craving and clinging. Because the objects of our attachment are transient, the loss is inevitable, thus suffering will necessarily follow. Objects of attachment also include the idea of a self, which is a delusion, because there is no abiding self. What we call self is just an imagined entity, and we are merely a part of the ceaseless becoming of the universe. 3. The cessation of suffering is attainable. The cessation of suffering can be attained through nirada. Nirada means the unmaking of sensual craving and conceptual attachment. The 3rd noble truth expresses the idea that suffering can be ended by attaining dispassion. Nirada extinguishes all forms of clinging and attachment. This means that suffering can be overcome through human activity, simply by removing the cause of suffering. Attaining and perfecting dispassion is a process of many levels that ultimately results in the state of nirvana. Nirvana means freedom from all worries, troubles, complexes, fabrications and ideas. Nirvana is not comprehensible for those who have not attained it. 4. The path to the cessation of suffering. There is a path to the end of suffering, a gradual path of self-improvement, which is described more detailed in the Eightfold Path. It is the middle way between the two extremes of excessive self-indulgence hedonism and excessive self-mortification asceticism, and it leads to the end of the cycle of rebirth. The latter quality discerns it from other paths which are merely wandering on the wheel of becoming, because these do not have a final object. The path to the end of suffering can extend over many lifetimes, throughout which every individual rebirth is subject to karmic conditioning, craving, ignorance, delusions, and its effects will disappear gradually, as progress is made on the path. http www.thebbingview.com buddhismfortruths.html. It is no accident that we are placed in a world marked by birth and death. It is a school to face fears and no reason. Seeking is the cause that sets man to first see himself reflected in the mirror of his own making. He also sees himself in the face of the other, and desire preoccupies him. Created as man and woman, mankind thus makes his own hell and sometimes seeks his own immortality in unrecognized sexuality. Man stumbles upon power that distracts him from the original cause. He finds violence, wealth, knowledge, beauty, and mistaken love as power vehicles to leverage physical events and people that become the illusions which he buys into. He becomes selfish and seeks via some power phase to build frequency of gratification to tickle his ego or psyche. To these ends he becomes addicted to power and gratification, thus allowing obsession to take over his life. Seeking the other world slows or ends. Ron O'Cook, The Dawning of the Omega Ages 2012, the year of human consciousness transformation. Many hope that we are in the midst of the great shift in consciousness, a questioning of who you are and what life is about, and the inability to function in your old ways of living. Since 1987 and the harmonic convergence, great waves of divine energy, the waves of love, have been transmitted to Earth, preparing us for the great shift as we approach 2012. The year 2012 marks the end of many great cycles of time, in particular the end of the 26,000-year cycle and the 225 million galactic year cycle. The Mayan, Incan, Aztec, Hopi Vedic traditions all acknowledge that 2012 marks the end of major cycles, and the beginning of a major advance in consciousness. The Great Shift is the term for our journey toward 2012, and our birth into an awakened state of consciousness. By 2012 we have the potential to transcend our old ways of being, and come to live together in joy, peace and harmony. This great shift in consciousness is happening to each and every one of us, to our planet Earth, our galaxy and our entire collective consciousness. When people get to know each other well, they penetrate into the depths where the real self resides, and that is the part of the other person they respect and love. Worth. Brigades. Saharasia has at several times in human history been the region from which massive armies marched out to conquer those moister regions lying at its periphery into Europe, China, India and sub-Saharan Africa. These would be the early Indo-Aryan, Kurgan and battle-axe warriors, the Scythians and Huns, the Mongols, Turks, and Arab Muslims, all of whom formed gigantic empires encompassing Desert Saharasia and parts of its moister borderlands. While the analysis contained in this book starts around 12,000 BC and ends at around 1900 AD, the suggestion is clear, that the modern problem of global terrorism also springs forth from basic Saharasian warrior roots. If you really want to know why so much of the world is in such a miserable condition, and to fully understand the current march to war within Islamic nations, this book will provide answers. One of the largest and most ambitious scientific and systematic, cross-cultural evaluations of human behavior ever undertaken. Originally a doctoral dissertation undertaken by the author at the University of Kansas, now supplemented with new chapters, and with hundreds of maps and illustrations. Saharasia is scarcely known to the wider public, given the controversial conclusions which precipitated from its development. But its findings, made as early as 1980, have been validated repeatedly by subsequent scientific discovery, and by world events. The new edition contains a new appendix documentation update on Sahara Sea viewing archaeological evidence suggestive of an ancient period of generally peaceful human social conditions, worldwide. You can also order this book from http://www.saharajid.org. The Power of Now, A Guide to Spiritual Enlightenment by Eckhart Tolle. In The Power of Now, he shows readers how to recognize themselves as the creators of their own pain, and how to have a pain-free existence by living fully in the present. Accessing the deepest self, the true self, can be learned, he says, by freeing ourselves from the conflicting, unreasonable demands of the mind and living present, fully and intensely, in the now. A reader's comment: after 12 years of searching, reading hundreds of books leading me down lots of dead ends, and living a life on an emotional roller coaster, finally I read something that really speaks to me. This is a fantastic book to begin your journey towards completeness. It has changed the way I think, like no other book. More links.